Computer-generated chess problem 02626 by Chesthetica. Black has a queen, bishop and pawn against white's pair of rooks and 3 knights. So white is ahead in material. 13 Shannon pawn units versus 19. Still, white's knight on f4 is threatened by the pawn and white's rook on a2 by the queen. What should white do here? How about knight on the c file to e3 with a discovered check? This sacrifices the rook. And then rook to e2 check. Aha! The black king is skewered against the queen. White doesn't need to capture the queen immediately and instead plays knight to d3. 3 knights can be pretty powerful, almost as powerful as the queen. King to b1, and now rook captures queen, sacrificing, in a sense, the rook, because now the black king can recapture it. And why did white do this? Because after knight captures bishop check, king to a1, king to c6, king to b1, knight to d3, king to a2, king to b5, e4, knight to c1 check, king to a1, king to c4, king to b1, knight to e2, king back to a1, knight to c2 check, king to b1, king to b3, e3, followed by knight on the d file to c3 for checkmate. So that's one way to go about it. Notice that in this position, if white, instead of playing knight to d3, had played rook captures queen immediately, then pawn will capture knight, maybe rook to c2 check, king to b1, rook to b2 check. If king to a1, knight to c2 mates immediately. So king to c1, rook captures bishop, pawn captures knight, knight captures pawn, and white can win this quite easily as well. That's another way. But what about this move, rook to e2? Any good? Very good, as it turns out. Now as you can see, if king to c1, knight to d3 check, king captures knight, and knight to e3 mates. So the king captures the knight on d1. And now knight to e3 check, king is forced to c1, rook to e1 check. Now in answer to the question, will the black bishop on b4 capture the rook on e1? You might say, probably. Very probably. Certainly. In fact, it's the only move. And this allows the knight on f4, that was threatened by the pawn on e5 by the way, to occupy the e2 square where the rook was and deliver mate. Now in this final position, black has a queen, a pawn and a bishop, that's 13 Shannon pawn units against white's rook and pair of knights. That's 11 pawn units. So black actually has more material in this final mating position. Let's take a look at that again. Rook to e2, king captures knight, that's a knight sacrifice right there. Knight to e3 check, king to c1, the rook on e2 needs to get out of the way, so the knight can occupy the e2 square by playing rook to e1. That's a rook sacrifice, so knight and rook sacrificed, followed by knight to e2 checkmate. I hope you liked this one. I know I did.
Chesthetica's Book of Chess Constructs, Volumes 1 through 5. Available on Amazon.